I still don't know what I'm doing sometimes, but I think that's okay. I'm not expressing that I'm necessarily lost, but rather that I've come to terms with where I am at. I had a rather intense spiritual journey that started at the age of 15. I was antsy and miserable, and I wanted to figure out the meaning of life, the nature of reality, the reason for my existence, and the end to all human suffering, the whole 9 yards. So I did what I thought was the most logical thing to the next step of my quandary, which was to go to my dad's library, which was filled with Buddhist scriptures. And I found myself reading each and every book one by one off the shelf, one after the other. And eventually, these books were confiscated from me because apparently I read too much instead of focusing on my studies on that time. I instead found myself online. I searched Buddhism and came across Zen Buddhism. The Zen Buddhist liturgy happened to be filled with all of these stories that were particular and specific to this tradition, and they were mesmerizing and confusing and impressionable. There was one particular story about a monk who spent the vast majority of his career reading scriptures and writing commentary on them. He heard about these monks who were meditating in the mountains, and in his moment of arrogance, he decides to go and teach them a lesson, but instead, he comes across a profound realization in that process where he is prompted to burn all of his commentaries that he has written up to that point. Useless. I thought, I want to have a realization like that. Whatever it was that compelled him to have the self-sufficiency, the independence, and the confidence to enable him to throw away all that he had up to that point, I really want that too. There were other stories that were more confusing and confounded me. For instance, there was this Zen story about a Zen teacher who in an audience of 500 monks, decides to hold a cat up to everyone and asks them to say one word to save this cat. The monks were arguing up to that point, and they could not say one word. So he had no choice, and he ended up killing the cat. There was a student who happened to hear about this incident after the fact that it had happened, and he responded by taking off a sandal from one of his feet and putting it on top of his head. I was really, really confused. And this was apparently important enough to be recorded in the Zen liturgy. It was more puzzling, and the more puzzling it was, the more I wanted to figure out what was going on. There was another particular story that encapsulated my inner conflict with all of these things. There was a story about two monks that went up to the windows to simultaneously roll up the blinds. There was a Zen master in the audience who pointed to the two monks. He goes, "One has it, the other hasn't. One gain, one loss." Which one has it and which one doesn't? What is it that one monk has that the other one hasn't that I probably don't have, and what I really want too? What is it that the Zen master had that enabled him to have this understanding, to tell something about the situation that I couldn't tell apart with what I thought I was equipped with? These stories always wandered in the back of my mind for years. And I think my obsession for these stories intensified when I would read the little footnotes that came along with it. And this is still true for Zen monasteries out there in the world. People work on these cases for decades sometimes in order to come to a proper understanding of what is going on. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I was meditating on my own. I had an intense period of frustration where I decided there was something about this whole process that really I wasn't quite doing right, I realized. I was always looking for the answers outside of me, whether it be authority figures or books or scriptures. And in a moment of intuition, something told me that I should be fully trusting myself, and I sat with it. I had a moment of epiphany where I realized, going back to the story of the monk with the two blinds, it was never about having or not having. It was never about gain or loss. It was never about winning or losing. It wasn't even that there was somebody special out there that was different than me. I was upset and angry because there was this Zen master in the story that had been pulling on my leg for the past 10 years. He was fibbing, but at the same time, I was elated because I discovered that I had already arrived before I had even left. To confess, I still don't know the meaning of life. I still don't know the answers to all human suffering. However, I still don't know what I'm doing sometimes, but I've come to the fact that I think that's okay. Thank you.